$20.5 billion. That is the exact amount Canada was pumping into the American economy every single year through tourism alone. And as of this week, it is gone. Not shrinking, not declining, gone. The numbers coming in from state after state confirm what nobody in Washington wants to say out loud. 10 million Canadians have looked at Donald Trump's America and made a decision. Not a political statement, not a protest, a permanent, documented, data-confirmed decision. They said bye. And the American economy is now bleeding from a wound that illegal tariffs opened, and that no court ruling, no Truth Social post, no new executive order can close. Hit subscribe button and stay with me for the next few minutes, because what I'm about to show you is not what you are hearing on any other channel. This is not about politics. This is about cold, verified, documented economic destruction that is landing on American workers, American business owners, American border communities, and American families right now, today, in every state that ever counted on Canada as a partner. And the most devastating part, the part that should stop you cold, is this. The tariffs that started all of this were ruled illegal by the Supreme Court of the United States. Illegal. And the man who imposed them is still trying to reimpose them through a different law. Hit that subscribe button right now, because by the time this video ends, you will understand exactly why this story is the most important economic story in America today, and why the mainstream coverage is giving you only a fraction of what is actually happening. Let me take you back to where this began, because the timeline matters enormously, and most people do not know the full sequence. When Donald Trump returned to the White House in January 2025, he made one economic promise above all others. Tariffs would make America great, make other countries pay, make American manufacturing surge, make American workers rich. That was the promise. That was the mandate. On April 2nd, 2025, a date he called Liberation Day, Trump signed executive orders hitting virtually every country on Earth, with tariffs ranging from 10% all the way to 145% on Chinese goods, the largest tariff wall America had erected since the Great Depression. He imposed 25% tariffs on Canada specifically, America's single largest trading partner, the country that buys more American goods than any nation on Earth, the country whose entire economy had been intertwined with America's for over a century, the country whose workers, tourists, investors, and consumers had been pumping hundreds of billions of dollars into American communities every single year. But here is what Trump either did not know or did not care about. Canada has 38 million people. It has a prime minister named Mark Carney, who is not a politician who stumbled into economics. He is a former governor of the Bank of Canada, former governor of the Bank of England, a Goldman Sachs veteran who managed the Bank of Canada through the 2008 financial crisis so well that Canada was the only G7 nation whose banking system did not require a government bailout. When Trump decided to economically attack Canada, he picked a fight with the most credentialed financial crisis manager leading any government on Earth. And Carney had been watching Trump for months before Liberation Day. He had been preparing. And when the tariffs landed, what Canada did next was not the response Trump had modeled, not the capitulation his team had predicted, not the fracture in Canadian business confidence his trade advisors had promised him would materialize within 6 to 8 weeks. What happened was the exact opposite. The entire country of Canada unified, not politically, not symbolically, economically. Canadians did not just protest. They redirected billions of dollars of spending away from America overnight, and they have not brought it back. The numbers are now fully documented, and they are staggering. In 2024, Canada was the single largest source of international tourists to the United States, $20.5 billion flowing into the American economy every year from Canadian visitors. 140,000 American jobs directly supported by that spending. States like Florida, Vermont, Maine, New York, Washington, California, Nevada, and Montana had built significant portions of their tourism economies around the reliable annual arrival of Canadian visitors. Canadian snowbirds spending winters in Florida, Canadian families heading to Disney World, Canadian hockey fans filling Vermont resorts, Canadian skiers taking over New England mountains, all of it reliable, consistent, massive in scale. Then Liberation Day landed, then the 25% tariffs hit, then Trump called Canada a security threat, then he started calling for Canada to become the 51st state of the United States. And Canadians stopped coming. Not some of them, not a dip. A cliff edge collapse in every single data category simultaneously. Flight bookings from Canada to the United States dropped 71% to 76% within 1 month of the tariffs landing compared to the same period the year before. Car crossings by Canadians from the United States fell 27% year over year in January alone, then 30% the following month, making it the 10th consecutive month of decline. Air travel by Canadians to the United States is down 24% year over year. In Q1 of 2026 alone, 450,000 fewer Canada to U.S. seats were available because airlines eliminated them entirely. WestJet cut its U.S. capacity by 19%. Flair Airlines cut its U.S. capacity by 58%. Air Transat announced it is eliminating all U.S. flights entirely by June 2026. Do you understand what that means? A major Canadian airline looked at the demand for flights to America, looked at the numbers, looked at the trajectory, and decided the routes were not worth operating anymore. Not reducing, eliminating, every seat, gone. Meanwhile, Canadian bookings to Mexico are up 15.7% year over year. Toronto to Cancun is now Mexico's single busiest international route, having dethroned both Dallas and Houston. The Canadians who used to spend their tourist dollars in Florida are now spending them in Mexico, the Caribbean, and domestically inside Canada itself. And that money is not coming back. One Canadian woman named Lisa McBean, a 54-year-old from Ontario who had been traveling to America her entire adult life, told CNBC this week, "The damage has already been done. It is no longer a boycott. It is a change. It is a divorce." Pause right there and drop a comment below. I want to know, did you know that Canadian tourists were supporting 140,000 American jobs before Trump started this? Drop it below. I read every single one. Now let me show you exactly which American states are bleeding and by exactly how much, because this is the part of the story that is getting no national coverage at all. In Vermont, hotel bookings by Canadians have dropped 45% since February of 2025. Border crossings into Vermont fell 30% year over year in March and April alone. Vermont's entire northern hospitality sector, breweries, ski resorts, bed and breakfasts, restaurants along the Quebec border had been built over decades around Canadian visitors who came regularly and spent generously. Now the rooms are empty. A Vermont inn owner named Krista Bowdish told a congressional committee that she was forced to lay off employees and reduce hours. And she said something that should echo in every boardroom in Washington. She said it is not just the tariffs. This is long-lasting damage to a relationship, and emotional damage takes time to heal. In Maine, almost 750,000 fewer people crossed the land border in just the first 10 months after the tariffs landed compared to the year before. Border crossings by passenger vehicles from Canada were down around 25% in the first 10 months of the year. One Maine Beach resort owner told the congressional committee his business was down 50% and described it as the worst year he had ever had, worse than COVID. In Montana, Canadians had accounted for nearly 80% of all international visitors to the state in 2024, contributing $170 million to the state's economy. In 2025, border crossings were down 19% in the first 10 months of the year. In Florida, which had counted on Canadian snowbirds as one of its most reliable and high-value visitor groups, the damage is now showing up in the real estate market. A Fort Lauderdale real estate agent named Alexandra DuPont is currently listing 35 properties, approximately 30 of which are owned by Canadians. She has 0 Canadian buyers. She told CBC News it is unprecedented in her 12 years of selling real estate. Realtor.com is projecting 10% price declines in Cape Coral, nearly 9% in Northport, and 3.6% in Tampa, as Canadian snowbirds sell into an oversaturated market with no Canadian buyers to absorb the inventory. Canadian snowbirds pump an estimated $6.5 billion into Florida's economy annually. Las Vegas casino executives at Caesars and MGM acknowledged on analyst calls that they were seeing fewer Canadian visitors. The Congressional Joint Economic Committee, a bipartisan body composed of both Republican and Democratic senators and House members, issued a formal report warning that the drop in Canadian tourism is hurting businesses in states all along the border, that businesses throughout the region are reporting fewer tourists, more vacancies, and lower sales. This is not a Democratic talking point. This is a bipartisan congressional finding. The total economic damage to the American economy from the Canadian travel boycott alone has now been calculated by Forbes at $4.5 billion for 2025. The U.S. Travel Association projects the loss at $5.7 billion when the full year is counted, and analysts say the number is going to grow in 2026, not shrink. Smash that like button right now, because this next section is where the story goes from bad to catastrophic, because the travel boycott is only one dimension of what Canada has done. The travel boycott is the visible surface. Underneath it is something far more structurally dangerous to the American economy, and it is already in motion. When Carney took office, he made one thing crystal clear. The decades-long process of an ever closer economic relationship between the Canadian and United States economies is now over. He said it out loud, he said it on the record, and then he got on planes. In the first month of 2026 alone, Carney visited France, China, Qatar, and Switzerland. He went to Beijing for the first visit by a Canadian Prime Minister to China since 2017, and he came back with a deal that reduces Chinese tariffs on Canadian canola seed from 85% combined to approximately 15%, unlocking nearly $3 billion in export orders for Canadian farmers and businesses who had previously been selling into the American market. He came back from Davos having secured a new agreement with China, unlocking $7 billion in export markets and a new partnership with Qatar to invest in major projects and deepen trade and defense ties. Then in late February and early March of 2026, just days ago, Carney traveled to India, Australia, and Japan, covering 30,000 kilometers and signing $5.5 billion in deals in a trip that the Royal Bank of Canada described as a lightning tour that signaled a new capital-first strategy for the entire Canadian economy. In India, he kicked off talks for a comprehensive economic partnership agreement aimed at doubling two-way trade to $70 billion by 2030. In Japan and Australia, he deepened supply chain integration across critical minerals, semiconductors, AI, defense manufacturing, and energy security. Canada has also concluded new agreements with Ecuador and Indonesia, signed investment deals with the UAE, and restarted trade talks with India after a diplomatic freeze that had lasted years. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister told the Royal Bank of Canada this week, "We are the only G7 country that has a free trade agreement with every other G7 country. And now we are activating all of it simultaneously. That is not rhetoric. That is documented architecture. It is a parallel economic world being built in real time, systematically, deal by deal, country by country, designed to reduce Canada's dependence on American market access from its current level of approximately 70% of Canadian exports to something substantially lower, permanently. And while all of this was happening, while Canada was signing deals across 4 continents, while Canadian tourists were redirecting $20 billion a year away from America, while Canadian snowbirds were selling their Florida properties and not buying back in, the Trump administration was fighting the same illegal tariffs in court for the 3rd time. Because here is the part of this story that ties everything together and that no 30-second headline will give you. The Supreme Court of the United States ruled on February 20th, 2026, in a 6-3 decision that the IEEPA tariffs Trump used to hit Canada, China, and effectively every country on Earth were illegal. 6 justices, including 2 that Trump himself put on that bench, Justices Neil Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett, joined the majority. Chief Justice Roberts wrote that the words of the 1977 law Trump used simply cannot bear such weight, and struck down the reciprocal tariffs and the 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods entirely. The ruling confirmed what every trade lawyer had been saying for months. Trump collected $175 billion in tariffs from American businesses and consumers, not from China, not from Canada, not from any foreign country, from American importers and consumers who passed the costs on in the form of higher prices. And he did it without constitutional authority. The Yale Budget Lab calculated the cost to the average American household at $300 to $1,700 per year. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York confirmed that roughly 90% of the tariff costs were borne by Americans, not by the foreign countries the tariffs were supposedly targeting. You paid it. Every American who bought electronics, clothing, car parts, tools, or household goods in 2025 paid an illegal tax that Trump imposed without Congress and without constitutional authority. And now 24 states have sued him again over the replacement tariffs he signed the same day the Supreme Court killed the first set, a move so aggressive that even Trump's own Justice Department had previously argued in a court filing that the replacement law does not have any obvious application to trade deficits. Before we get to where this goes next, hit that like button because this is the analysis that connects every piece of the picture. The boycott, the illegal tariffs, the court rulings, the new deals Canada is signing, the $5.7 billion loss to American tourism. All of it is one story. And it leads to one conclusion. What Canada has done is not just an emotional boycott. It is a documented, strategically guided, expertly executed economic pivot being led by the most qualified financial crisis manager running any government on earth, a man who specifically spent his career understanding how economic systems break and how they get rebuilt differently afterward. And the pivot is working. Canadian Minister of Foreign Affairs Anita Anand said this week, "There is not a room I go into where people are not interested in Canada. Canada has everything the world wants. Canada is on a positive path to growth." Drop a comment right now and tell me, do you think any American administration, Republican or Democrat, has ever had to deal with a situation where its closest ally was simultaneously winning in court, winning in trade diplomacy across 4 continents, winning the economic nationalism battle at home, and winning the public opinion war inside the United States all at the same time? Because that is exactly where we are. Drop it below. I want to know what you think. Here is where this goes. I see 3 paths forward, and I am going to tell you which one I believe is most likely, and exactly why. Because unlike most political coverage you will see today, I am willing to take a stand. The first path is the slow bleed. The Section 122 replacement tariffs currently before the courts get struck down, just like the IEEPA tariffs. Legal experts note the law has never been used in this way, and Trump's own Justice Department previously said it doesn't apply. If that happens, Trump is left with only narrow sector-specific tariff powers. The 15% global tariff wall comes down. American businesses and consumers get some relief, but the Canadian pivot is already done. The deals Carney signed in China, India, Japan, Australia, Qatar, Ecuador, and Indonesia are already signed. The trade infrastructure he built is already operational. The 10 million Canadians who said "Buy America" are not coming back to Florida resorts and Vermont ski mountains just because a tariff rate drops. The structural damage to 140,000 American jobs survives the legal victory. The second path is the escalation trap. Trump keeps fighting the courts, keeps issuing new tariffs under new laws, keeps escalating against Canada, and every escalation becomes a recruiting tool for Carney's alternative trade architecture. Every new tariff threat is an argument that Canada needs the EU CPTPP trade bridge Carney is now building. Every insult directed at Canada is a billboard for the alternative economic world Canada is constructing. In this path, the administration is structurally doing Carney's recruiting for him. The coalition grows not despite the American pressure, but because of it. The longer it continues, the more permanent Canada's alternative trade relationships become and the less leverage the American market has over Canadian decision-making. The third path is the one I believe is most likely, and here is exactly why. The midterm wall. The Section 122 replacement tariffs Trump just signed must expire in 150 days unless Congress votes to extend them. That 150-day deadline lands in July 2026, just months before the November midterm elections. Every Republican senator in a state with a border with Canada, every Republican congressman in a district with farmers, auto workers, small manufacturers, or tourism operators will have to stand up in front of their voters and explain why they are voting to extend a 15% global tariff that the Supreme Court already ruled illegal in its first form, that is costing the average American household $800 a year, that has driven away 140,000 American jobs worth of Canadian tourism, that has caused $5.7 billion in losses to the American travel sector, and that has pushed Canada into the arms of China, India, Japan, and Australia simultaneously. Watch July 2026. That is the date that matters. That is the vote that forces every politician in Washington to calculate whether the cost of this confrontation is worth the political price. And that is the moment. Not today, not this week, when the real reckoning for the American economy begins. Here is everything you need to know in 30 seconds. Canada was pumping $20.5 billion into the American economy through tourism alone every year, supporting 140,000 American jobs. Since Trump's illegal tariffs landed, Canadian visitors are down 27% by car, down 24% by air, with a $5.7 billion total loss to the American travel sector. The Supreme Court ruled Trump's tariffs illegal 6-3 on February 20, 2026, including 2 of his own appointees. He collected $175 billion illegally from American consumers, not from foreign countries. He immediately signed replacement tariffs under a law his own lawyers said doesn't apply. 24 states sued him within 13 days. Canada, meanwhile, signed $5.5 billion in new trade deals across India, Japan, and Australia in 1 week, secured a deal reducing Chinese tariffs from 85% to 15% on Canadian canola, is building a trade architecture with Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and South America simultaneously, and its foreign minister is traveling the world reporting that every room she walks into wants Canada. My prediction, the replacement tariffs get struck down before summer, Congress faces a forced vote in July, and the 140,000 American jobs lost to the Canadian boycott do not come back on the same timeline because the Canadians who said "Buy America" have already found somewhere else to go. The question I want you to answer in the comments right now is this. If the tariffs that started all of this were ruled illegal, if they cost American families $1,700 a year, if they cost the American economy $5.7 billion in Canadian tourism and 140,000 jobs, if they push Canada into China's arms and Japan's arms and India's arms permanently, what exactly did America win? Answer that below. I read every single one. And if this is the level of analysis you have been looking for, the analysis that connects every piece of the picture that the 30-second headlines will never give you, subscribe right now, because the next chapter of this story is already being signed in trade ministries across 4 continents. And when it lands, you will want to have been here from the beginning.